and welcome into the Who's On podcast, part of the Sabre Podcast Network. Virginia finishing off the regular season at 27-4, second in the ACC. They'll be the 2 seed in the ACC tournament coming up later this week. They finished it off with the win over Virginia Tech to even the season series against the Hokies. I've got Brad Franklin joining me here from CavsCorner back yet again. Brad, I'm going to start off with a pretty simple question, but if I told you before the season Virginia would be 27-4, finish second in the ACC, do you sign up sight unseen?
Probably so. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because, as UVA observers, UVA fans, folks who have been following the program for a number of years, getting used to winning is fun, right? It's nice. And it's very unusual in my experience, right? For as long as I can remember, for Virginia basketball not to be good. And so the idea that if you told me before the season that Ryan Odom and company were going to go 27-4 in their first, sure, I think you sign up for it. Now, I might quibble a little bit because I'm intense. So I might say, well, like, who are the four? Does beating Duke and Carolina matter if they lost to Boston College and the artist formerly known as Damon Stoudemire at Georgia Tech? Maybe not, right? But at the same token, like I said, success is success. And 27-4, that's probably good enough to get you into the top 3 or 4, at least, in the ACC. So you're looking at a double bye. And in a first season, especially with a completely rebuilt roster, it's hard to turn that down. Now, that being said, one thing about winning is you get a little greedy, right? And you get used to seeing a winner and you want to keep them winning. And one thing that has been nice about this season has been maybe the lack of how everything used to be in the Tony years, especially before the title, right? Everything was like some sort of referendum on the style, his system, the defense, or playing defense, right? So it's kind of been nice to sort of be disconnected from that piece of it. So at the same time, you still want to win. And I think as you go forward here, the record in the regular season, obviously great, but the postseason is going to be the place where I think most Virginia fans are going to care exponentially more now than they would have even if they knew it was going to be 27-4. You've seen a really good team that's really talented. Unfortunately, now you know that they got lots of potential. So you're really hoping to see some wins here in March.
I guess they're just playing normal basketball now.
What is it that Rothstein quotes every time or tweets every time? It's like
a different kind of beauty.
Kind of beautiful, right? Yeah. It's just interesting to me because as somebody who really enjoyed the old way, I'm very much enjoying the new way. Like, to watch a team crash the offensive glass. I mean, what is this, right? What is this newfangled offensive rebounding and second chance points you're talking about? But one thing that has been unusual, though, is just the depth. Tony, at this point in the season, you kind of knew the rotation was gonna shrink a little bit. It usually already had. At this point, they've got like starters and then like kind of starters, and they really can play in a variety of different combinations. Now they have what I would call like a more natural sort of group that they go to in crunch time. But over the course of a game, big contributions are coming from that bench. I think that's why most games Virginia's bench is going to outscore everybody. And I think that's a huge lift. And I'm really curious to see what that looks like now that we've actually entered March.
Yeah, you would expect at this point under Tony Bennett, the rotation shrinks a little bit. I was surprised, like, just going through it, like, there was a couple years where he had a starting lineup, like, from the get-go of a season, but there's a lot of times that would shift a lot during the season. Ryan Odom, outside of the one weird game in Blacksburg on New Year's Eve, it has been the consistent 5 guys. And it's worked because I keep telling people, like, it's 5 starters and it's 4 guys coming off the bench, and like, they're all going to play like roughly around the same minutes. So like, it doesn't matter when they come into the game. To go over it, 4th most wins in a single regular season. No surprise. 28 wins happened 3 times under Tony Bennett. There's also another 27-win team under Terry Holland back in the 80s. So those are the top 5 in program history. 2nd most wins by an ACC first-year coach in conference history. I saw this one from David Teal, only behind Bill Guthridge. He had he got handed a pretty good hand that first year. But like, to say, like, and this to put it into context, like, what Ryan Odom has done in year one, with a roster that, 11 new guys, freshmen, internationals, transfers. No one expected it to come together. And you keep trying to dig into it. Like, why did this work?
Right.
Why
Yeah.
doesn't this work for other people? And I think one is the age. Like, there's a
Hmm.
lot of
Yeah.
old dudes on this team that have played a lot of basketball. Dallin Hall, Testa Ritter,
Yeah.
Malik Thomas, Devin Tillis, so on. It's Jakari White, so on and
Yeah.
so on.
Right.
But I think it's also it sounds like coach speak. It sounds so like we've heard it all before, but like they get along, like, and they really jive with each other on
Right.
and off the court.
Yeah. I think you can look over at Tony Elliott, right? And sort of what they've done. And it's a similar sort of model. In terms of, you're not just looking, you obviously are looking for players who fit a lot of the sort of metrics that you're looking for. I think that's a big part of both of those operations right now in terms of how they're looking at things. They're not just looking at like, give me a guy who can play. They're looking at a guy with specific numbers that the analytics say fits, right?
Sure.
So I think that's part of it. But then among the dudes who fit in terms of the numbers, now you're looking at the guys who fit in terms of personality. And I think that's the piece that Tony Elliott nailed, that Ryan Odom and his staff nailed this year. If you had told me on December the 31st, after that triple overtime game in Blacksburg, that Virginia was about to hit some bumps, I would have believed you, right?
Yeah.
Because that was a really weird game, and certainly the way those minutes sort of stacked up in overtime and whatnot. And they kind of went on a run after that, right? I think since that game, they've only, they've really, let me just say it like this. They have looked, at times they've looked really superior, right? At times they've had to like gut out wins that otherwise should have been much easier. But by and large, they figured out a way, and they've done it together, and they've done it in various ways. It hasn't always been like, oh, and this is the part where they call the so-and-so play. No, they're having to figure out different ways. It's a classic sort of different guys, different nights sort of routine, different matchups, different, those kinds of things. And I think that honestly is one of the reasons why I'm actually super excited to see this team in March.
Yeah.
With love and respect to Tony Bennett and what Virginia did during that period of time, it was going to have to go this one way. You had one path, right? It was going to be just like this. And in the times where they ran into a bit of a buzzsaw, be it a team that was kind of shooting its mind out and from three, a team that was able to be more physical than them, a team that they just couldn't get stops with,
Sure.
especially if they had smaller guards. So I think that in this sort of reality, and it'll be really interesting to see this play out over the next couple of weeks, can Ryan Odom and his staff maximize the potential that this group clearly has? And I think that to me is the difference. Is, when you look at the idea that these are a slew of guys who were sort of pushed together. Their season started here, but realistically, like, they didn't actually like get to know each other that well until there. But
Yeah.
you can see the places where those seams have just completely gone away, where they are super comfortable with one another. They genuinely, I think, because of that experience that you referenced earlier, I think they just genuinely pull for each other. And that's why something like what happened in Blacksburg doesn't linger. And that is not the way myself, you, others who have covered sports for a long time, that's not usually the way these things go. And I'm really curious to see if maybe in the transfer portal era, if that's not going to be something that we see more often than not, because most people who come into a situation, they're all sort of coming into a different spot of, hey, at this other stop, I was the guy and I got all of these shots, or I got all of these minutes, and I'm just going to have to go into this other situation and know there are other guys like me. And we all have the same objective, which is, quite frankly, to benefit in terms of their own careers and then come together and have some success. So I think that's something that I'm also going to be tracking as we go forward, not just for UVA in this season, but for greater, college sports in general as it all goes forward.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see, and this is away from the point, but just like what the future maturations under Ryan Odom look like. Does it look the same? Does he go in
Right.
different ways? And so I am interested to see that. I do want to go back to this Virginia Tech game real quick. 76-72 win. Got out to a great start, then kind of, faltered a little bit, and then kind of finished it out. But
Yeah.
I'm going to start with Ugonna Onyenso. 16 points, 5 rebounds, 3 block shots, hit 2 threes that were so great that it sit Mike Young and Mike Young dropped
So an
an F-bomb.
existential crisis.
Yeah, like he said when he said that line, what the F am I doing wrong?
Doing
And put his
wrong.
hands. I
Yeah.
was like, do I need to like go put my hand on him?
I know
Like,
it did kind of. I felt bad for the guy. I did. It's interesting though because that's a perfect microcosm of everything we're talking about, right? Here you've got a guy who is a journeyman big man, right?
Yeah.
Who it didn't work for him at Kentucky, didn't work for him at Kansas State, and he's going to come to UVA and like be a significant contributor. Okay, if you talk to most people in the offseason, I think most what I would call like plugged in observers, people who knew vaguely about him and weren't just like getting their stuff from UVA side. They were like, okay, he's a nice piece, but there weren't a lot of expectations for him, right? Yeah. Not only is he a central part of the defense in terms of the rim protection, you could make an argument, and I'm really curious to see how this shakes out this week with all defense and defensive player of the year and all that stuff. But Virginia has two players who could absolutely make the case for defensive player of the year. That's not new around Charlottesville, right? But it being centers is new, right? That it's all block shots. That's very, very new.
Hey,
but no,
I'm trying to get on the ballot Ugonna Onyenso for Defensive Player of the Year. I think that's the best option.
Give it to one guy, chop it in half. But no, I mean, he hits those couple of threes, and it does sort of illustrate just when you have a team full of guys who can shoot, including your fives, it does open up some possibilities. Like in a situation like that where maybe this guy or that guy isn't hitting, and you can kick it out to Grinlow or to Ugo. I mean, it's a hell of a luxury to have, right? And I understand why it sent Mike Young into an existential crisis because, quite frankly, he can't get that sort of production at the big moments from the guys that like are clearly the dudes that are supposed to do that, let alone the guys who are not. And that's probably been their biggest problem is that in these close games, they just have not been able to find the right combination of things between their various playmakers to make the plays in the big moments to give them the wins that would make them go into next weekend feeling pretty comfortable. Now, maybe they get to the ACC tournament and they're like a hot knife through butter and they're going anyway. But suffice to say, unless they go the NC State route, I don't think it's going to work out for them. And a lot of that's going to be because they don't have the type of depth that UVA has. And again, credit to Ryan Odom and his staff for not just bringing in talented players and bringing in guys who fit well together, but then being able to continually figure out ways to get these guys minutes and so that they can produce in these big moments. And think about how many close games UVA's won and the way that they've traded sort of the MVP-ness of it all, right? Sometimes it's Testa Ritter, sometimes it's Sam Lewis, sometimes it's Malik Thomas, and in this game, it was Ugo. I mean, it does really speak to the overall talent level of this team and certainly to the potential for what they might be able to do down the road.
He's definitely one of the players, though, too, when we talk about future Ryan Odom and how he puts his teams together, that you're going to look a little bit harder at, some of the guys they're bringing in, because nothing about Ugonna Onyenso's year at Kansas State last year screamed super efficient, big off the bench, can stretch the floor. It's going to be one of the best shot blockers in the country. You knew that he had shot blocking because what he did at Kentucky, but just that level of confidence that this staff has given him to kind of spread his wings. I think that's also something that's going to help them in recruiting in the future and be like, look what we did with this guy. We see things in your game and we can take you to that next level. Next one I want to talk about, just because the discourse throughout the season, I think it started to turn a little bit where people are realizing this now. Dallin Hall 0 for 1, 0 points, 9 assists. And if you go back to it was 51-51 in that game. He makes the next two passes to get them the lead. Makes the pass on the Onyenso 3 as well. Time and time again this year, when it's crunch time and they need someone to go out there, just make a play, let him have the ball. And that's why, when they played Duke, Duke was putting Dame Sarr on him, their best perimeter defender, because they're like, shut it down and everything else will just kind of, be kind of blah, because they need him to be kind of the head of the snake on offense.
Yeah, and I think early in the season, one of the things that was clear to me was, he might not score a bunch of points and he might not be super consistent in terms of knocking down the shots, but he gets the ball where it needs to go. Sometimes that means getting to the ball to the person who's going to score or shoot or whatever. But sometimes it means he knows how to keep it moving. I mean, when he's in there, even again early in the season, it's just something that stuck out to me was the ball just never stopped and it moved. And so he had a good feel for it. I think now he's got a good feel for the guys around him, and that has certainly helped. I also think in a sneaky way. Look, I'm not saying the kid's perfect by any stretch, or that he doesn't have defensive lapses sometimes, but I do think he's been much more physical as a defender, and
Yeah.
I think that's been a real benefit for him because I do think, you know, Chance Mallory is a young kid who has so many skills, but one of them right now, he's not the biggest kid, and he's not able at times to body guards in the way that he kind of needs to be able to. And so the UVA has Hall to be able to do that. You can see a little bit of the difference. I mean, there was a little stretch in that first half where Tech was kind of, I wouldn't say going at Chance, but they were definitely taking advantage of wherever he was. And I think part of that is just a size thing. And that's going to be something Chance is going to have to figure out, much in the way that other guards of his size have had to figure that out. But I think that Hall has been a really physical player, and he's been the tough shooting nights have not slowed him down.
Yeah.
He's found other ways to contribute. And to your point, come away with 9 assists in this game. I mean, you think about in a game where you're only going to shoot in the 40s, right? Where you're not knocking down, you're not even at 40% from three, right? So you
Yeah.
needed every one of those assists. You needed to manufacture as much points as much offensively as you could, as many points as you could, and he's a big reason for that. I think as you go forward, one thing you're going to look for, the NCAA tournament is a guards event, right? That's something Tony and his staff figured out, brought Kihei Clark in there, and I do think that sort of unlocked it for him, is to put 3 guards on the floor. When teams do that to them, and you've got 3 ball handlers, can UVA do that in addition to not just Hall and Mallory, but whether it's Thomas or Lewis or whoever's got to pick up that slack? I think that's going to be a real challenge for them, and I think Hall is going to be especially important because his production, he can't dip at all. He's got to continue to get the ball to the right spot and be able to move it around the horn the way he has.
Well, that's a great segue because Malik Thomas is the next one I wanted to hit on because I just think that some of Virginia's best basketball this year was kind of that early January period where
Yeah.
Thomas was playing some of his best basketball of the year and was just offering a different kind of scoring threat on the floor. We got to see a little bit more of that in this game against Virginia Tech. He had 16 points, 6 of 9 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. Hit the Thailand shot. We always like to throw that out there when someone's hitting from the logo. It ain't the
Yep.
logo at Virginia, it's
Yeah.
Thailand. But Malik Thomas, we saw him kind of bully some guys at times to get into that mid-range jumper that he likes so much. And
Yeah.
if that shot's hitting for him and he's getting to the rim too, like that's just a different element to this
Yeah.
offense. And they're going to need that in March.
Yeah. And honestly, I think this is going to be the place where you really see his worth, because with love and respect again to the regular season, there's something different about tournament basketball where guys can kind of, I don't want to say do it a little bit more on their own, but there's definitely those, you just see a lot more guards creating space for themselves, going through contact. It's just it looks like NCAA tournament basketball, right? And I think one of the things that Thomas is the best at, in addition to the kid, it doesn't look like anything shakes his confidence, which he and Jakari White are both very similar in this respect, right? They might go 0-5, but they absolutely believe in their heart that number 6 is going in, right? And I think that's good for him because he's had some moments this season. I think it was at Stanford, or there was somebody early in the January run where he could not hit the broadside of a barn from deep, but he kept shooting them, and that's important. But I think one of his central sort of skill sets is that he can draw contact, that he can play that sort of elbow down game, right? And what I mean by that is he can kind of get a guard on his hip, get a guard on his side, get to his spot, find a way to get a shot. And usually, more often than not, he's pretty good at either making that shot or getting to the line. And I think that is something that is huge in the NCAA tournament, especially being able for guards to sort of manufacture those points. It's going to have to be free flowing. That's what UVA does. They're going to shoot a lot of threes. That's what UVA does. But at the same token, I feel like Thomas is going to be a very important piece because that's a potential matchup that when teams are sagging off, because that does happen, right? I think some of the teams that Virginia's had some struggles with at times this year have been because guys are kind of sagging off and kind of blocking passing lanes, and they're basically daring them to make the threes they take. Thomas being able to get to those spots and make those shots, I think that's huge. And like I said, I think his talent level, if there has been a little bit of maybe a break from expectations, I thought he would be a much more, I wouldn't say ball dominant or volume guy, but maybe I felt like he would give them more than he did. He was steady. But there also been times when, other guys are kind of carrying the water and he's there, but he's not really doing a whole lot of the carrying. And that's okay. It's by design that way. I just kind of thought coming into the season that he would be their lead dog a little bit more than he's been. This is a
Same.
golden
Yeah.
opportunity for him to do just that, because this kind of tournament, especially the NCAA tournament, I think is kind of well suited for a guy like that to do exactly the kind of thing that he does.
No, same. And before the season, I predicted, he'd lead the team in scoring and probably earn some all ACC honors. I don't think he's going to get ACC
Right.
honors because it's been a really deep conference this year,
Yeah.
some really talented players.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do think that maybe it was just for us understanding Ryan Odom and his system and everything. Like we knew that he liked to play a lot of guys and he liked to give guys a lot of minutes, but I don't think we fully grasped just how diversified the offense was and
Yeah,
how
that's fair.
it's going to be this guy this night, this guy this night, and this guy this night. So like it really doesn't lend itself to having
Yeah.
that kind of ball dominant guard. And Test Ritter is he's been the leading scorer. One, because he's been one of the more consistent guys, but also he just is kind of in those right place, right opportunities. Like you looked
Yeah.
up this past game, he had missed his first 5 shots or so. All of a sudden, he has 13 points. You're like, wait a minute. Like, when did he get 13 points? And it's like, oh, yeah, he got a put back there, and he got some
Yeah.
free throws here, and like it's just kind of a little bit everywhere. But we're talking about March and postseason basketball and everything. Let's look at the ACC tournament now, preview that a little bit.
Okay.
UVA tipping off Thursday at noon, number 2 seed in the ACC tournament. They're going to face the winner of NC State or Stanford and Pitt. Stanford Pitt obviously play on the first day on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Nothing better than that Tuesday at the ACC
Tuesday.
tournament.
Hashtag
loves
Tuesday
it.
in Greensboro is just my favorite. Yeah.
Tuesday in Charlotte. Any worries about potentially a third matchup against NC State this season? They always say it's so hard to beat the team twice in one season. Now is it harder to beat a team for a third time? They
Yeah,
beat them by a combined 44 points this year.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when that third time is that team's second game in 2 days, I think you're always concerned about teams that have scouted you that much, right? And I think because UVA and NC State played not just earlier in the season, but then again here fairly recently.
Yeah.
You're obviously mindful that not a whole lot has changed since the middle end of February to now. In terms of what UVA wants to do, the personnel, some of that stuff, right? However, I do think from a matchup standpoint, Virginia actually matches up with them pretty well. I don't think that what State wants to do with the Williams kid and such, I don't think they can do as well given UVA's size. Yeah. And I think that UVA, this is again, it's a bizarro world for me to say things like this, but UVA's size in the post is such a big opportunity. But it's also not just the centers, it's also Tess, right?
Yeah.
And so I think DeRitter and his physicality is hard. It's hard for them. So I don't have any heartburn over playing NC State again. I think this tournament, at least until you get to the championship, because that's really the only place where Virginia's going to come up against a team that, to this point, Virginia has not shown it can beat. I think the Hoos have to be able to. This is much more about them, right? The shots they take and make, the mistakes they do or don't make. I think turnovers have to cut down. You have to be more efficient. You have to value the ball a little bit more than they have through some parts of the season. Certainly, you're happy to see them come in off of a win and be able to sort of get their shit back right, because there was a couple moments leading into that Duke game where you start looking at it, you go, man, this team's actually really good. And then you see him against Duke, and you're like, oh,
yeah.
and then even the Wake game was very much like it should have been different, but it wasn't. Now, the great thing about March is that everybody's doing the same thing, right? Everybody's on short rest. Everybody's trying, to bank scouts from what they've got. The one thing great that UVA has going for it, and why the double bye is so advantageous, right, is that you are able to focus on essentially 3 teams. NC State has to focus on 2, and then they've also sort of got to have in the back of their mind that they might play again. Well, how much of that time that their staff is going to be devoting to prep and scout work is going to be on UVA? Probably not much. They're going to go on whatever they had in the first 2 matchups, right? It makes a lot more sense for them to not try to spend extra time when they need to get some wins, right?
I mean, sure, go with the game plan from the first 2 matchups.
That's what I was going to say, and it didn't exactly go well the first 2 times. I mean, and look, I'm fascinated by Will Wade and NC State, not so much just because of like what they've got on the floor, but sort of everything around that program. Yeah. If there's any fan base or team in the country that really personifies everything that is just super stressful about this entire era of basketball, it's that one, right?
Yeah.
Will Wade comes in as a guy who I think everybody expected big things from. He clearly expected big things. He had enough resources to do some really good things. And our buddies Joe and Joe down in Raleigh talked about this after the loss to UVA. Is like, look what Ryan Odom and his staff did with the resources then the roster they built. That is not what happened for NC State. And regardless of how this goes, State might go on a run, and that's great. And if they are able to do that, more power to them. But I just think that if you're UVA going into this matchup, you're feeling confident, not just because of what you've seen in these two games, but also to what you know of NC State, what you've seen of them beyond the two matchups with UVA. I think UVA has a very clear idea of who they are and who they're not. And how they need to win the game. I think you have yet to see, at least I think, consistently NC State put its best basketball together. And if they're going to do that in Charlotte, hey, again, tip your hat to them. But I feel pretty confident that UVA can come out of Thursday and get a win. Now, what goes on beyond that, that's very TBD.
Yeah. Going all the way back to that, to like the offseason at NC State and all the noise around Will Wade and then getting Darion Williams and everything, like, the whole time I felt like that guy just like yelling and like, but no one could hear me. I'm like,
yeah,
they don't have anyone over 6'9".
No, they don't.
Their center is Ben Allen Lubin.
Yeah.
We have seen that in the ACC already. We know that.
Yeah, if you don't let them run, if you're not letting them rim run, they're not particularly good shooters. They're not gonna they might chase you off the 3-point line. They're physical. They get their hands in passing lanes. They've got a number of athletes. But if one of their guys doesn't get hot, it's just going to be tough for them to score against a Virginia team with this much size. Now, get to Charlotte and refs are calling it super chippy, super tight, and TDR's not on the floor. And that does kind of change the calculus a little bit. And if there's anything that I feel like Virginia has to work on, it's keeping that dude in the game. I mean, he's got a history at this point, right, of missing large chunks of first halves because he's on the bench with 2 fouls.
Yeah.
He's really got to limit that as much as possible because they are just a very different team with him on the floor, or at least the availability to have him on the floor. Even if he's in and out, him going and sitting for 12 and a half minutes is just not exactly a recipe for success. Now, at the same token, if you want him to be aggressive, you want him to be physical. It's what he does, and it's who he is. But I do think that he's one of those guys, for whatever reason, whether the refs just sort of expect it from him, whether he is a little bit more handsy and he hasn't quite adjusted to some of the realities of playing the college game versus the semi-pro game or the pro game overseas. You're playing with adult men, and that's a very different place physicality-wise.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, is because when I had him on the podcast earlier this season, he was like, the biggest surprise to him wasn't any like the people are talking about foul calls or all this stuff. No, he was like, these guys are like really young and they're like energetic and like it's kind of like us, we're both dads, like we're trying to play with our kids and stuff, and it's just like, golly, why won't you stop? That's what he's right. Right now.
Can you just let me chill out for a minute?
Yeah, these 18, 19-year-olds are just like, guys, calm down, just like
ease up.
Walk the ball up and like get into the offense.
Yeah, and what's funny about that though is you're exactly right. And at the same token, one of the things I feel like UVA's done the best at is when he runs the floor. Because very few times I feel like when he's running the floor, he's not Jakari White. Jakari White might be the fastest basketball player I've literally ever seen. But DeRitter has a way of getting down the floor and getting to the rim really quick in a way that is it kind of catches me off guard every time he does it. But they are a very good team on the break, especially when he's being able to get to the rim. I think that is something that you'd almost like to see them do more of. I think this year they've dabbled in it, and they certainly have taken their shots when it made sense. Again, I know I'm on the one hand I'm saying they got to value the ball, and now I'm also saying they need to run a little bit. I think what they need to do is just make good decisions, right? Yeah. Understanding when it's there and when it's not, but also understanding when they should try for it. I think that's the big thing. This team has done a really nice job of this season, is when to push the pedal and when not to. And I think that has not necessarily always that good discernment between those two things hasn't always necessarily meant that they weren't going to turn the ball over somewhere else. But it has been good for them in terms of their offensive production. I think they need as much of that as they can get it, definitely in Charlotte.
I don't know if it makes sense, but I think Jakari White might be faster than his body. Like, I think he's going so fast. I don't know if his body is like keeping up with him. But just last thing on the ACC tournament, what do you think of just the path overall? So we talked about NC State or Stanford Pitt is going to be the matchup that on Thursday. From there, it's going to be Miami or Louisville, SMU, Syracuse. Like, again, there's so many teams. Like, why does the ACC have so many teams now? But Miami or Louisville's SMU or Syracuse, those are all teams they have beaten this year. Louisville's interesting because they played them at a time when they didn't have Mikael Brown.
Right.
Miami's a team that played them really physically, so I think that could be an interesting matchup down in Charlotte. Yeah. And then obviously, right now all you can focus on is get to the ACC title game.
That's right.
And then we'll just see what happens.
And just figure out who's there. I do wonder though. I mean, listen. Duke is easily the most talented team in the conference. I don't think that's a stretch, and they got the best player. I mean, Boozer is as good as advertised. Yes. He's so good at. He's got all of the elements of a big man and many of the elements of a smaller guy in the sense of his speed, of his agility, his quickness, that kind of stuff. I don't think with Caleb Wilson out, that Carolina is nearly the same. But Duke's also run into the injury bug too. So I think that if you're Virginia, you're just trying to get it, trying to get there, and you worry about it when you do. In terms of, if they're able to beat NC State or whomever on Thursday and they get to Friday, none of those teams really concern me, except to your point about Louisville. I do think Louisville has probably been the biggest disappointment for me in this season, just simply because of the amount of talent and what I kind of expected from Kelsey. I expected that program to really blast off this year, and that just hasn't happened. In a lot of ways, it's been a super frustrating season for them in a variety of spots. I could absolutely see that kind of team getting hot at the right time. So if you can avoid playing them, that's probably not a bad thing. Otherwise, I think you're feeling pretty good about your Thursday, Friday, and trying to get to Saturday.
And too, if Virginia plays Louisville, Isaac McNeely will have at least 20 points. Like, you can already write it down. Like, that's just what's going to happen. That's how it goes. All right. Last thing before we wrap up here, ACC end of season awards are going to be coming out. I don't know if it's Monday or Tuesday, but they're going to be coming out this week. So I thought we'd get out ahead of it and put out the official Who's on Podcast ACC awards. I think it's a clear runaway. Cam Boozer for ACC Player of the Year.
Absolutely.
Like, no point of even talking about it. I've talked about in this UVA centric podcast about Cam Boozer more than I anticipated. But Defensive Player of the Year, it's a weird one because we mentioned earlier, like, Ugonna Onyenso has been such an impactful defender. Johan Grunlow's been so good. I think there's been some shouts for BJ Edwards, who's been a really good defender at SMU. I kind of land on this Duke defense has been so good this year under John Shire that I'm okay with if you just want to pick someone. If you want to pick Dame Sarr, if you want to pick Malik Brown, I'm fine with that. Malik's a guy I've known since he was a freshman in high school. If you want to go, even if you want to go Cam Boozer, because like if you look at the defensive ratings, like he's one of the best in the league. So I'm fine with that. I'll pick Malik Brown just for, if I have to pick one.
Yeah, I think if it's me, I'm either voting for Malik Brown or I'm going to split it between Grunlow and Onyenso.
We can do that. This is our award.
I was going to say we could do that here. The thing I am curious, because you got to be thinking about, maybe it's the poli-sci major in me, but the constituencies, right? Who's voting for whom? Yeah. I could totally see different voters looking at these teams and seeing those two guys and giving the nod to one of them, and they basically cut what otherwise would have been the Virginia defense, right? But the same thing could happen to Duke, where they've got several different guys that are sort of in that mix. And it would not surprise me if they all sort of knock each other out, and then somebody for like a BJ Edwards sort of sneaks up out of the group. But no, for me, it's either Brown or the two UVA centers.
Yeah. So, here's the interesting thing is teams only nominate one player. And then this is something that we had a discussion.
That's right. Yeah.
This is something we had, and I don't know who's in it. I don't have a vote, obviously, but I was talking to a lot of people that have votes on Saturday. I don't know who Duke nominated. I think Onyenso got nominated for Virginia, but I'm not totally sure for Defensive Player of the Year. So that factors into it too.
Yeah, that does. Remember
a couple years ago, Reese Beekman and Ryan Dunn, take your pick. And so that's going to come into it. And I'm going to bring that up because we can get into this next one. ACC Sixth Man of the Year. I've thought for about a month or two, this was pretty much decided that it should be Chance Mallory, but I was
Yeah.
told on Saturday, unbeknownst to me, that he is not on the ballot. Virginia went with Jakari White
Oh,
over
interesting.
over Chance Mallory. So, I mean, we can have an argument
Hmm.
about that if like the ACC's fault or is it Virginia's fault, but
Hmm.
that's what I was told. Is
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
I'm saying all this because I think Chance Mallory has been the clear runaway for sixth man of the year all season. He leads all six men in like points.
Hmm.
He's like up there in rebounds, even though he's only 5'9", 5'10", and he's
Yeah.
up there in assists as well.
I would just say it like this. If we a lot of times for these awards you give, the defensive stuff goes to the team with the best defense, right? Has there been a team all year that has been able to manufacture points from its bench the way UVA does? It does
Yeah.
feel like the sixth man of the year has to be on UVA's roster because of the way that UVA's sixth, seventh, and eighth men have been able to produce for them. The thing I will say is, and this is somewhat unrelated but related, I do think that maybe the way that these things get voted on, I understand the way that it trended and why it became such a thing. But the idea that you can only vote for one player who the schools nominated is it's
Yeah.
kind of dumb, right? Like, let's be honest. Like, that's just dumb. Like, I think if you're a voter who votes in this thing and the conference is going to accept you as somebody who is voting, you can be able to tell whether or not you want to vote for Grunlow or you want to vote for Onyenso, right?
Yeah.
Or whether you want to vote for Jakari White or you want to vote for Chance Mallory. At the end of the day, like the ACC is essentially, blessing, right, the people who vote for this. If they don't have the agency to pick the people they actually want to pick and the schools have to nominate them, schools nominating them does not actually solve the problem, which I think they were trying to solve, which is essentially like because of the number of teams.
You don't want to get some random, yeah.
Exactly. But at the same time, like you're going to cut somebody off at the knees that you otherwise should not have, because if you had given the option for people to vote for that player or players, they would have. It should just be open. I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But
So I don't know how these votes are going to go in the end. But I did want to shout out Chance Mallory for that.
absolutely.
Most improved. I think Juke Harris from Wake Forest has gotten
I think
a lot of play for that.
That seems like
That's
the dominant one. Yeah. That's probably where I'd go to.
the next most interesting one is going to be Coach of the Year because there's
Yeah.
three candidates. There's only three.
I think there's only two.
Okay, so I'm guessing you're throwing Jay Lucas out.
With love and respect to Jay Lucas, which is love and respect is apparently
Yeah.
my thing for the podcast. But no, I'm not saying that he's not worthy of being in that conversation. But at the end of the day, it's really a two coach race for me. And I honestly, again, I'm very impressed by Ryan Odom. Very impressed with what he's done this season. I don't think that game in Durham was pretty substantial. This is a Duke team that is not just really good because they've got blue chip players.
Yeah.
This is a Duke team that does it on both ends of the floor. They are incredibly difficult to defend and incredibly difficult to score against. I think they're top 5 right now in KenPom in both categories. They're number one. They got the number one defense in the country. They do it in a very specific sort of way where they're all long and athletic, and they just guard the crap out of you. And I think roster building, right, in this day and age, is every bit as important. I understand that where UVA was picked, and that will always be when it comes to Coach of the Year. Hey, where were you picked versus what were your expectations versus your results, right? And at the same time, I'm just saying that Duke team is absurd. And if you're going to give it to a John Shire, given their recruiting and sort of the way that they've brought guys in and the amount of talent that's come through there, I think this is the one. And I do think in this very, you can look at it as like the sort of grander sort of legacy, like sometimes we're just like, okay, well, this is the year for the X, Y, and Z. But if you just look at it just through the lens of this specific season, that team has absolutely been so good on both ends of the floor. It's not just that they're riding blue chip NBA draft pick talent. They are just that good, and he's done a hell of a job with them. And in the biggest game for UVA against them all season, it was not even close. And I do think that's a significant sort of piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and no, you mentioned it too. Like, it's not just Cam Boozer coming in and being this dominant, like it's a huge part of it, but improvement from guys that they had from last season.
Right.
Caleb Foster's gotten so much better. Patrick Ngongba's gotten better. Isaiah Evans, obviously, he's a guy that, if Drew Karras hadn't had the explosion that he has, he might be up there for most improved player. But
absolutely.
So yeah, it's that internal growth. But I also just think like we saw so much in like the later K years, like it was kind of just roll the ball out.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing roll the ball out about
Absolutely
this team
not.
with the intensity intensity that they have on defense, and then some of the stuff they're doing offensively too. Like John Shire, I'm not going to be upset either way.
Yeah.
And I threw Jay Lucas out there because he's done an incredible job to either.
And to be fair with, I mean, you're not crazy to put him in there.
No.
I've read and seen that everywhere, and I understand that there are a lot of people who would disagree with me on this. I just did not see enough from that Miami team consistently to put him in that conversation with the other two. If the other two weren't there, it'd be different, right? But they are, and therefore for me, it's really the two of them. And again, if Odom wins it, it's not that I don't think he should. I think he's absolutely worthy of it. It's just if you're going to compare him to Shire, at least in my book, that one game in Durham is a huge factor, and certainly over the course of the season, Duke has been absolutely a terror to play against on both ends of the floor. It's hard for me to overlook that, even though I respect the hell out of what Ryan Odom has done, and considering where Virginia was picked in the preseason, they've had an outstanding season.
Yeah.
Shire, I just feel like he's been a little bit better, and in a lot of big spots, Shire's really come through. I think he's done a really nice job of not just managing the talent, but calling the game, making the decisions. I think he's been very solid in that respect. I know a lot of Virginia fans are probably throwing tomatoes at me right now, but that's just the way I think it is.
No, I don't disagree. I think either one of those guys, it'd be well earned. He'd be the first Duke coach since 2000 to win the award, which is crazy because there's a lot of times where you're like, was this guy really better than Coach K? Like I'll say one, Dave Lato, like really, like it was a great season, but like really, we got to evaluate what this coach of the year is. First team All-ACC, I think four of these were pretty easy for me. Boozer, Caleb Wilson, Abuka Okori from Stanford, and Testa Ritter. The fifth one, I went with Malik Renaud because he was on the third place team in the conference. So I think that's fair. Brad, you are the owner of the best beard in Ace in UVA media. Like no one can
I
touch
appreciate
that. And I appreciate you coming on the pod, man. We got
very happy to do
stuff. I know y'all will have someone down there in Charlotte as well, and we're looking forward to that. And then we got March Madness. Like Virginia's back in the mix this year. That'll keep us moving through the month of March. But Brad, thanks as always.
Very much appreciate it, man. Take care.
All right, that'll do it for the Who's On podcast. Hit the bell icon and subscribe on YouTube to the Who's On podcast YouTube channel. Follow, subscribe, and leave some 5-star reviews on Apple and Spotify. We'll be back later in the week. I've got Mike Tannenbaum, former NFL GM and also the son of one of the UVA football players. He'll be on the podcast later this week. We also might have some basketball. We're going to have to wait and see, but we'll see you then.